Booknerds, welcome back to another Facebook Live. I'm Vidushi, a member of the Booknerds editorial team, and today we are going to be in conversation with a lovely, amazing author, Maithreyi Karnoor. She's the author of Sylvia, this amazing book. She's a translator, poet, and writer, the perfect amalgamation of the three. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Hi, Maitreyi. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. How has your day been going?
Hi, Vidushi. It's lovely to be here. My day has been great. Well, as usual, I live by myself. It's been a regular day, but also I've been anticipating this, so it's been a good day. Yeah.
Too. I have so much to say on this book. It led me through so many complexities of society, of human beings, which I'm not very much in touch with. But yes, it was an amazing book. I have to congratulate you on this. This is your debut novel. How are you feeling? Are you excited?
Thank you. I'm excited, yes, but at the same time, I'm also, ever since the book has come out, I've been feeling this great sense of relief. And to be honest, it feels like redemption in a way because I, I've been doing all kinds of things with my life, but with the book, it feels like the slate has been wiped clean and, everything was okay. I have no regrets. So the book kind of says that I've been doing okay. Yeah.
Did you write a lot in the pandemic? What was it like for you?
Actually, I finished writing the book before the pandemic began. So during the pandemic, I have been doing a lot of writing, but not this book. I've been doing translation. I've been doing poetry, lots of poems, in fact. Of what I've written during the pandemic, I don't know. They're just poems, scattered poems all over the place, and most of them are not published yet. I'm working on a collection, so that's what I've been doing. So hopefully that should come out next.
Wonderful. Okay, so I have to ask. This book, it's so complex in all its tragedy, and yet it is so positive. It's like a blooming flower in the dead of winter, honestly. How did you manage to come up with such a wild idea? What was the inspiration?
Wow. Okay. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for describing it so beautifully. Um, when I began writing the book, I didn't know I didn't know that I was setting out to write a novel. I just wrote because I felt a compulsive need to write. The story was welling up in my head, and I had to put it down um, on paper. I just kept writing, and so some writers kind of have everything planned, and they know the number of chapters they're going to write. They know the exact structure. They know how the plot evolves. That was not the case with me. It evolved as I wrote. The more I wrote, the more it kind of grew in my head, and I kept writing. And I put a whole lot of myself into it. And, with the structure, the thing is, I didn't want for it to be very linear and kind of orthodox in its approach. As the characters kind of came to me and I wrote them, I was thinking, I kind of felt close to them. I felt like I knew them, that we were friends. And at the same time, I felt, that I was something of a warrior in their lives. And I wanted to kind of give them the distance and that space to just be themselves, to recede a little bit into the background. So that's what I've done with my protagonist. After I wrote the first part, I thought, as you know, it's the character Sylvia has a little. She's named after Sylvia Plath. And I was thinking about the bell jar all along, and I remembered how tragic and kind of heavy. It's a beautiful book, but at the same time, the trauma is really heavy. The trauma that the character goes through is really heavy, and I didn't want to do that. I take pain lightly. It comes. When it comes, you deal with it, and then you move on. So I wanted to give my character that space to proceed and just deal with it in a light way and evolve as a peripheral character in the other people's lives. And through that need, I kind of created this structure, which is rather heterodox. but and I knew I was taking a big risk there, but yeah, I had nothing to lose really, So I did what I did. I did what felt right, and it seems to be working. Well, I'm happy with it. So it's okay.
Oh, definitely. These are all amazing characters that you can really, really relate to because there are such nuances in their personalities. Like for Sylvia, I have to say, my heart broke for her, basically. And without spoiling it for the other readers, the progression of her story from what her past was, and that was basically her future also. My heart is still shattered. It's in pieces somewhere in the corner of my room. I'm so sad after reading that. I wish it hadn't happened so, but now that it has, it's like reality. There are things that you don't like and things you have to put up with, but also things that are so beautiful, like her relationship with her Facebook friend. So, okay, why Goa? I have to ask, why did you choose Goa of all locations to have the basis of your first story?
Well, I was living in Goa when I began writing it, and I more than me choosing the place chose me. If you know what I mean. I was living there. I was translating a novel at that time, but I was also absorbing a lot about the people and um, everything around me and the history of Goa. I read up a little bit and I spoke to people, and that was kind of growing inside me. And the story came from that setting in Goa. It I didn't sit down and say, okay, now I have this character and where should I put him? Maybe Goa is a good idea. No, it came very organically. The story emerged out of my Goa experience. So that's how it started. But then again, it went from there. It went to other places. And although Goa was essentially a background there, it just started from there.
You know, we associate Goa with vacations and having a fun time, but we don't really truly ever imbibe the culture or really look into the nuances of the place. There is so much tension between the villagers and Bhaubaab at the start of the story. Like they have their own customs and they have their own views against outsiders, and they're very skeptical of his presence. How did you manage writing that as well, an outsider yourself? How did you imbibe that whole view?
I'm glad you asked me that because I've been hoping to have an opportunity to talk about this. Because Goa is so much more. I mean, Goa is popularly known as a vacation place and all of that. But that's only recent over the last few decades to 3 decades. I have lived in Goa. When I moved to Goa, I had no such romantic ideas of, being an introvert. I was just happy being by myself. I didn't want to party or, go out. So I chose to live in South Goa, which is far away from where in this tiny village where there's nothing much happening. It's this sweet, sleepy little village. I just chose to be there so I could. I come from a small town. I'm not used to the fast-paced city life, and it just makes me very, very uncomfortable. So I've always kind of sought to, live in a place like that to kind of recreate my childhood home. And Goa seemed just. I lived in Goa earlier, also about 10, 12 years ago. I had a job there, and something about it felt very right, and I felt I belonged. I felt very connected to that place. So I've always wanted to go back. And the second time I went, I specifically chose to live in the south, in this small village. And I mean, there is this kind of um, suspicion about the outsider, and rightly so, because what's happening is Goa has its own history, its own identity, its own culture, and everything. But owing to whatever historical interventions and everything, that lots of people come in from outside because they have this idea about Goa, this party place, vacation place, and lots of people buy property there. They buy big houses and all of that, and it's and they have lots of money, a lot more than the local people, and they create this kind of disparity there, and it's resented by the Goans, and rightly so. For the Goan psyche, his memory of colonization is just so deeply imprinted on the Goan psyche that this feels like another kind of colonization, if you know what I mean. Outsiders coming in, owning it, and doing all sorts of things. And it's, for instance, there is very little respect for the local identity. And for instance, some celebrity might think it is okay to streak on a beach in Goa. They would never do that back home, not in Bombay, not in Pune, not in Delhi, wherever. So what makes them think that they have the right to do things like that? So there is that kind of resentment towards outsiders and suspicion towards outsiders, because there is that identity at stake. And this is something that I was aware of, and I was always very careful to be respectful. And I wanted to belong. I didn't want to stay there as an outsider and just party and chill on the beach. I wanted to kind of invite the local, and I found out, fortunately, that once you show that you come with the greatest respect and you want to belong, they understand that and they open their hearts to you. And I've had that 2 years that I lived there, which is such a beautiful experience. They're always there looking out for you. They make friends, and I felt very, very safe there. I could go for a walk in the middle of the night and know that I'll be fine. There's very few places in India where you can do something like that. So yeah, so Goa became home, and when you kind of undo your shackles and try to absorb and everything, it grows on you. So I could understand where people are coming from, what they thought, and what was going on. So I used all of that in creating my characters and their interactions with the people there.
Definitely, that sort of balanced view of your narration, it was so beautiful because it accurately represented the thoughts of the villagers and also of our protagonist, which was so in contrast, but they were beautiful. They didn't feel judgmental at all, and that was beautiful. Also,
Yeah,
you talked about going for
extremes.
walks in the night.
Sorry, yeah. No, there are these two extremes. One is the
Yeah, yeah.
judgmental way of doing it, and the other one is romanticizing it. I didn't want to do either because neither of them is right. So I just wanted to kind of let it come from within, and for it to come from within, I had to kind of absorb it, which I think I've done. I don't know. Well, if you think it's done well, I suppose I let it get in.
I I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart, I felt like I was in Goa myself, especially with the way you had written all the dialects and the pronunciations of the people while they were speaking the dialogue. It was amazing. So, yeah, coming to the walks in the middle of the night, there is such a disparity between how men are treated in society and how women are treated. Like, there are these two characters, like Bhaubaab, he's in the middle of a journey, and at night his car breaks down, and so he stays in the car, he sleeps in the car, right? And it's raining, and he feels relatively safe, even though there is danger around. And yet, there is another character who goes in the middle of the night for a walk, and she gets so tensed and anxious that she's outside and she could be in danger, that she has a panic attack and she faints. So there's such a contrast there. Did you was that placed naturally, or did that happen naturally, or was that something that you really thought about including in the book?
But it came organically, of course. I've lived all my life here, and I know. This doesn't exactly happen in Goa. Those two incidents. One of them is the woman walking in the night, having an anxiety attack and fainting. It's set in a village, in a fictitious village in Karnataka, and this one also. It's implied that he has moved out of Goa. So basically, just looking at other parts of India, generally wherever. And as a woman, I have faced sexual harassment. I'm sure you so have you. I don't think there's anyone in India who's not faced sexual harassment, assault in one way or the other. And that is the reality of our life, sad as it is. We fight it every day, we do what we can, we talk about it, but it's there. And being cautious is important. But sometimes you also want your freedom, and it's about prioritizing things. Whether you want to be late at night, will do it, but do it carefully. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, it doesn't help. And it's always a choice. It's always you know, deciding what you want at that point of time. So those are things that I have felt, I have experienced, and it came out. And I suppose it's different for a man. The dangers are of a different kind, but you know, in this matter, it's a different kind of feeling. And I have been out sometimes late in the night, and I have felt I've always looked over my shoulder, wondering if I'm being followed, if you know, and lost count the number of times I have been molested. So these things just you internalize them and they come out, and that's what I put my characters through as well. And at the same time, those questions you ask yourself, what are you doing? What am I doing? Is it right? Should I be out at this time? Do I want to go out and get fresh air? Should I be just cooped up at home? Okay, is this a risk worth taking? I take it. I go out. So, I made those questions appear in the mind of my character as well, because that's what I had gone through.
The worst part is finding it in a book that is supposed to be positive. It wasn't even a shock to me because we've become so used to all of these things happening, to all of these things taking place. And so that is why I was so happy when there were so many conversations of interreligious marriages and physical relationships and all of that in the book, because it felt like you were talking to the audience and you were trying to normalize that finally. Was that something you did, of course, knowingly?
I'm not so sure. See, I was normalizing it because it's normal for me. You know, I mean, coming where I come from, one is aware of all the kinds of bigotry around you. I have had to face some, but at the same time, I have also had certain kinds of freedoms which were not afforded to other people. I mean, even now in this day and age, we hear about honor killings, parents of the girl murdering the boy because he belongs to a different caste, a different religion. All that keeps happening. But also in some urban spaces, in some strata of society, there is some amount of acceptance. And I fortunately happen to be straddling that space. So yeah, well, it's normal for me. I think people should fall in love with each other no matter where they come from, and just be happy. I mean, what else is there to like love? So yeah, but it's also, I mean, there are also problems with the relationships. There are issues always, and I wanted to kind of focus on those rather than the fact that people have to brave odds to get together. Okay, they've got together, now what? Let's move on. So that's the kind of you're right. I mean, I was normalizing it because it's normal.
Which is something we really need at this point. We need all of these kind of conversations. Again, coming to a part that I absolutely enjoyed was there are so many dialects and there are languages in the book that I didn't really understand. A lot of the times I had to Google it, and then Google had no answer for me because there were very small words that were well inculcated in the region, in the small villages that you had picked up. Was that your translator side coming out? Because it felt so raw and honest. It almost felt like I was being dropped in the middle of the pool by my swimming instructor and being left to navigate to the ends myself. And it was such a good feeling to know what the protagonist was saying when they were mentioning a small word or a certain space. So how did that come about?
Yes. But again, that also came out very, very organically. I come from a place, a small town, which is, the northern part of Karnataka, bordering Maharashtra. And before the states were reorganized on linguistic lines, my village was part of the Bombay state. So there was, my grandparents went to Marathi medium schools, whereas we are Kannadigas, we speak Kannada at home. It's that kind of thing. And also, earlier in the 15th, 16th centuries, it was part of the Adil dynasty. So there is a lot of Urdu spoken. So there is, I go out of home, there is at least 2 or 3, and languages are mixed. There is plenty of Marathi in my Kannada, and there is Urdu words which I'm not even aware that they're Urdu. They're just part of it, and that's how we speak. And that kind of that gives it a very nice richness. And that's how I grew up. And if I go to Bangalore and speak my Kannada now, people will probably laugh, and they always characterized the language of northern Karnataka. But I thought of it as a big advantage. It was a very, very positive thing, because it also kind of made me more open-minded towards languages, cultures, people, and all of that. So that, and also, being as Indians, most of us are at least bilingual. There's English we learn in schools. We are speaking something or other different language at home. There's Hindi, whatever. And if you're from the south, you're also learning Hindi. You're learning one South Indian language. So I mean, I'm trilingual. So each language has its own experiences to offer you. And when I was living in Goa, it's unfortunate that I didn't learn Konkani properly, but I picked it up. I mean, the sounds of it were so beautiful, and it's so musical. You hear it. So I picked up tones and accents, and I have an ear for that. So all of that came in, and that was necessary for each of those characters. A Goan character had to speak with that kind of Konkani role. A Kannada person had to speak with that kind of accent or whatever, and that came in. And I don't want to write in a standard whatever literary English format. I want to bring the flavors of the lives of the people there into it. But at the same time, this is something that came to me while as owing to my experience with translation. Sometimes it's important not to translate a word. Not to. As much as possible, as if there are equivalents, use them. But sometimes, when a word is uttered in a certain language, say in Kannada, it has its music, it has its rhythm to it, which is lost when you translate it. So retain it. What's the harm? Just retain it. Lots of people do. African writers do that. Different kinds of writers do that. Retain that word, but make sure that it's not opaque. It should be contextually easy to understand. You may not know the exact lexical meaning of a certain word, but based on the context that it is written in, based on what is happening in the story, what the character is going through, you know exactly what it means in that sentence. So that was it. Those flavors had to be retained, and I just decided to do that. So yeah, if you notice, there is some there's Dakhni Urdu. There is Kannada, of course. There is some Konkani. What else? I think there's even one sentence in Tamil, although I don't speak Tamil. But I have also lived with Tamil people, and I know a few words and things like that. So all that flavors have come in.
I have to say, I loved seeing all the pages filled with those languages, because it made me feel like I was traveling there. I was with those people, and I was inculcating their culture also. It was not at all watered down. It was so rich, in fact. And at the starting few pages, there was this line where a person was trying to communicate with Bhaubaab, and he said, Goa is best, no? And best was written with the spelling BAYST. And it was beautiful because I could picture it in my head. I could almost hear how he must have said it. And it made me feel so included in the interaction, which brings me to this passage in the book. And the passage is just phenomenal. It's not at all exactly relevant to the story, right? Because it's just a passage about all the clutter in a house that has been abandoned before. It was in Bhaubaab's story, and they were trying to catch a snake. And so Bhaubaab tells Lakshmi to go and get him some of the stuff, like a hook and a pipe and a gunny bag. And so he's searching for it. And there's this passage about how there's so much clutter all around in a house that no one has lived in for a long time. And it's so beautiful to read, that entire passage. I would love to read it aloud. It's strange how one finds all kinds of things lying around houses that haven't been inhabited in a long time. There are discarded knickknacks from the last inhabitants, things dumped by the hangers on that such places inevitably attract, and garbage thrown by people trying to declutter their own homes. Although Bhaubaab's home had undergone much cleaning and renovation, the paraphernalia of abandonment hadn't been completely cleared yet. It had been merely bundled up and dumped in a corner of the large backyard and left there to miraculously shed its problematic character. That those two words, problematic character, it's those words, those little puns and metaphors that are so beautiful in the writing. Is there any such passage that you absolutely is your favorite? Even though I have to say it must feel all of this is your child, you can't really decide one of it. But is there any?
Oh, plenty of them. In fact, I mean, it's like asking which is your favorite child. I wrote the whole book, so I like most of what I've written there. And the thing is, I had a lot of fun writing it. Although there is mention of pain and all that kind of, accidents and bad things happening, but I was enjoying it. I was having a great time. This, for instance, even when I set out to write, I didn't have anything planned. It flowed as I wrote. So, and when I was, when I decided to talk of the chaos of all this clutter in somebody's house, I thought of, how our approach to rubbish, when we always want to keep our homes clean, but what do? We just dump it on the streets outside. It's just basically get it out of my sight. I don't care what happens to it, because that piece of trash is still a piece of trash and it's out there somewhere, and it's not, as long as it's not your problem, it's someone else's problem. You don't care. That is our approach to rubbish, isn't it? Which is why we have thousands of garbage lying around. We don't want to make sure it goes to its logical conclusion somewhere. It's composted or whatever, recycled. None of that. We just want to get it out of our sight, and then we don't want to think about it. So this was basically, people throw things and then they just wait for it to stop being a problem for you. And how that happens, we don't know. It's a miracle. So these thoughts came to mind. So but that is a good passage. Thank you for mentioning it. And there are other things also. Perhaps maybe later I can read something.
I have to ask, how did you decide on what location each character is going to have their story plays in? Because locations and languages, they play such a big part in your story, right? So how did you come up with that?
Like I said, it originated in Goa because I was living there. I was thinking of the people there, and that Bhaubaab character came out of a wordplay. As I explained, I was thinking of the baobab tree. There is this baobab tree in a village very close to where I come from. It's just 30 kilometers. It's in a small village in central Karnataka called Saunu, where there are 3 huge baobab trees, and I've been intrigued by them because they're supposed to be 1800 years old, and nobody knows who planted them because nobody has been alive since they were planted. And but they're protected, and they're this amazing, humongous living beings, and I found them fascinating. And I mean, wordplay is something that I enjoy a lot. Puns and things, and I look at something and pun jumps into my head. So when I was living in Goa, I knew that to address a man respectfully, call him Bab, and the word for brother is Bhau, and I just put them together and sounded like Baobab tree, and I thought of fashioning a character with a name that sounds like a baobab tree, who also has a connection to a baobab tree. So it kind of just grew from there like a seed. And so the first character happened in Goa because of his name. And then others to place people in different places and all of that. I also had to draw heavily from my own experiences. And so I kept going back to the places that I have lived in, which aren't too many, but in each of those places, I've kind of had a deep connection, and I've understood it and felt it. So they all kind of pulled at me a little bit to say, okay, let's go there now. How do you tell the story of, for instance, it starts in Goa, and then say, for instance, Sujit and Shaila are staying in this village. It somewhat resembles the village that I come from. So So I had to put in a little bit of all the places I'd come from, and that's where I took my characters because I had stories to tell about all those places. You know that village where Sujit and Shaila live? I called it Kanas, which is Kannada for dream. So yeah, it's the Kannada word for dream. So a non-Kannada reader wouldn't know it, which is fine. But I also kind of, dreamt it up, which is why I called one of my places Kanas.
You just said you dreamt it up, the story, the entire story.
No, not the story, but no, by dream I didn't mean that I went to bed and dreamt it, but I thought of it, and I
That would have been wild.
in a dream, yeah.
Okay, so how did you get into translating? Did you always have such a fascination with languages?
I've always had a fascination with language, yes, and translation. I suppose just inadvertently translate all the time, especially if you're bilingual. You keep going back and forth, and I mean that is something that is part of our everyday lives. But translation as an activity, literally translation as an activity, started when I was in my master's. I was studying in Indian University in Hyderabad, and we were doing a course on film, Indian film in the 1950s. It's a cultural studies course, and we were watching one film every week and discussing it and reading theories around it. And these films were from all Indian languages. And we had an international class, the students from the world were part of it. And so each film had to have subtitles in order for everyone to appreciate it. And the one Kannada film that was chosen for the course did not have subtitles. And they were thinking of dropping the film because nobody would understand it. And I just, said, no, let's not drop it. Let's watch it. I will write the subtitles. And they said, okay. And I didn't know what I was setting myself up for because writing subtitles for a whole film is a long activity. And they just gave me 3 days to do it. And so I didn't sleep for 3 days straight. Sat down, translated it, did the subtitles, downloaded a software, taught myself how to do it, placed the subtitles in the film, and then we watched it in class. And I felt so happy. And while doing it, I realized I had so much fun. It was amazing, such an amazing experience. So I thought, okay, translation is something that I can do. And then there was an anthology being prepared on contemporary literature. They were trying to look for a translator to work with some Kannada place. So I said, okay, fine, let me do it. And I realized from subtitling films to working with literature there are many differences there. For a subtitle, you have to say the closest in meaning to the dialogue in the shortest time because you don't have the time to read the reams and reams of text on the page. Whereas with literature, it's a different kind of requirement. While you're recreating the meaning, you're also recreating the affect, the tone, the moods. For that, you have to exercise a different kind of freedom. You have to take it, you have to own it, you have to internalize it and bring it out in the best way possible. So although sometimes, a word may not be strictly an equivalent of what is there in the original, but you are describing it in such a way that you are making sure that what was intended in the first one in the original is being recreated here. So these things I learned as I learned on the job, so to speak. So, with time, then I went from translating short stories to a play, to poetry, and then a novel. So, it progressed like that. And that's how I got into translation. And I must say, it's come in very, very handy in writing fiction. That kind of strength that translation gives you is so rigorous and so deep, and it kind of stays with you. I think it also gives you certain kinds of skills which are important for writing.
Yeah, and what I loved about it was that it was still grounded in reality, even though it was fiction. They weren't all like it wasn't Indian stray towards fantasy with all the made up towns and made up names because you were speaking only one language, but rather it had this amalgamation of different languages and people who we could come across in daily life. And it's just so riveting to imagine that you could have this kind of adventure yourself. How do you keep the essence of the languages you translate? And even more so than that, how do you keep the sense, how do you capture the sense of the writer's vision of what they really wanted to portray in the words?
You mean in translation or in this generally, or in Sylvia?
In translation. In translation.
In translation, okay. I'm self-taught in translation. I haven't read. I haven't. But I suppose that they do these translations to do that, and I'm quite happy about it. But I just realized, well, translation is just it's intimate reading. You have to kind of be in love with what you're reading. Only then can you do justice to it as a translator, because you take it in, you hold it so close that it kind of becomes part of you, and then when you retell it in a new language, you've lived it, you've known it, you've experienced it, and that there is a certain honesty that comes out. And if you know how to express yourself well in that new language, that fidelity flows, and you and fidelity is not just about recreating one sentence to the other or whatever, word to word. It's really about recreating those emotions. What did I go through when I was reading that text? I would want somebody who does not read that language, who can say, if I'm translating from Canada, what were the emotions I went through when I was reading that book? I would want that for the English reader as much as possible, because some things are always lost in translation, going to the cultural bridge that you are trying to traverse. But I would want the English reader to feel that. So how best do I do it? So it's kind of, after a while it becomes intuitive. Initially you put a lot of thought and calculate everything. Then it's something like an intellectual muscle memory, if I can call it that. It becomes part of you, and then you start doing it. And yeah.
That kind of authenticity and vulnerability, it's also visible in your writing in Sylvia, and in your stories, and in your poems, I mean. And that kind of, how was the process of writing Sylvia in that way? And what was the publication process like, especially working with Westland?
Oh, writing Sylvia was, like I told you, it was just sheer joy. I enjoyed it so much. And to be honest, I wrote it at a time when I was actually not feeling so great. I was undergoing depression. I was undergoing medication. I was seeing a psychiatrist. It's not a great time in my life. And that was the only thing that kind of kept me up, kept me afloat, because it just felt like there was nothing else happening. There's nothing in my life except for this, and that was the only thing that defined me. So it kept me going, and it was just sheer joy. It kept me grounded. It kept me sane. So that was it. And the publishing process, it was delightful, and I'm surprised by that, because I have heard about how debut writers have struggled for years together to get somebody to take notice and accept it. And I was prepared for that. I thought, okay, that's how it's going to be. I wrote it because I had to write it. I enjoyed it. And getting it out there is a different story altogether. And let me not get my hopes high, because I don't want to set myself up at this point. So, but I was absolutely thrilled and surprised by how smoothly it worked out. I have a wonderful agent, and he read it and he accepted it in a month. He's sending it to me, and within a couple of months, he already found me a publisher. And also the publishing process itself, the editing and everything was just so amazing. I became friends with my editor. We had such lovely conversations. We laughed, and sometimes she would point out something which sounds a little silly, and or sometimes she would make a suggestion, and I would say no. For instance, when I described Bhaubaab's physique, I said I described his nose as in a certain way. And she sent me a little note saying, thank you for not saying aquiline nose. Because everyone just wants to have aquiline noses, and that's how most characters have spoken tall and blah blah. I never had an aquiline nose. My character doesn't have that. So, great, good job. So we had so much fun. And
I especially love his nostrils.
yeah. Yeah. So I didn't want my characters to be stereotypical in that sense. So I had a lot of fun through the editing process, through the cover design, everything. It was just one beautiful dream, really. And I'm surprised and thankful for it.
And we are very grateful because we got to have such an amazing book by the end of it.
Thank you.
All right, I have to ask you your thoughts on translating and writing in general, how they can be bridges of communities and the generations in general. Like in translation, in the writing, there are many times where different communities and their thoughts are being mentioned. And as a northerner myself, I have never really experienced the southern life. And reading that in a book, it was so exceptional to me because I never thought I would get to imbibe that kind of culture and to take a part of it. So, writing, it's such a great thing and such a grand idea to communicate the ideas between communities and to make bonds. And even between generations, where Bhaubaab, when he first meets Sylvia, he says something like, "Oh, your parents must have fallen in love." And she just looks at him strangely and she's like, "Who says fallen in love anymore?" And he's then trying to his very hardest to somehow communicate his feelings to her. That's such a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, talking about uh, setting it in those places and then crossover between cultures and things like that. Um, I basically drew from my experiences. I come from a small town. I was born in a place called Hubli. I was raised in this tiny little place, which you would probably have trouble placing on a map called Mulu. It was when I was growing up, it was such a small place where everyone knew everyone. And I could be somewhere and people would recognize me and say, "Oh, you are so and so's daughter. Why are you out at this time? Do you need to go home? Do you need a ride on the bicycle?" It's that kind of smallness in terms of geography and everything that I'm used to, and that's been a very strong part of my identity, and that is what I relate to, and that's why my stories also came out of such places. Indian English writing is so urban centric. You know, most stories are either set in Bombay or Delhi, one of the bigger places. I cannot do that because I don't come from there, and I can't. I mean, if you ask me to write a story set in Delhi, I won't be able to do it because I don't know what it is like. I can only write about my experience. So, uh, there is this kind of um, you know what's the word for it? This beautiful syncretic. I mean, it's fast eroding now. It's a very sad truth that it's eroding so much, and there's a lot of bigotry that's coming our way now. But when I was growing up, there was this beautiful syncreticity. We didn't care about whose house we ate in our house, just playing somewhere. You start off in the morning in somebody's house, and then by the evening you're in somewhere, you've fetched up somewhere else. And there is that kind of thing, and that is important to me. And so there is no kind of contrivance. There is no extra effort made to communicate between cultures, between religions or whatever. It's just so natural, it's so organic. We just think if I have a neighbor who belongs to a different religion, I eat in their house and I don't have to think twice before saying anything to them because they're just people. And that was there. But I'm also aware that, it's not as beautiful as all that anymore because those differences are being made more and more stark by the day, and so I had to kind of make sure that it's grounded, that I don't romanticize it. So that came from having lived in those parts in my formative years. Yeah, and also generational thing, you know, I think it just comes from being very, very observant. When I'm talking to somebody of an older generation, sometimes I have to change my tone a little bit and say different things because you don't want to catch them in the wrong foot. So things like that. It comes from being observant and having fun while doing it.
And observant you are in your works. We love them so much. Is there something else we can expect soon? We do get a little bit of a snippet at the end that you're working on a collection of poetry called Skinny Dipping in Tiger Country, which I have to say, the title, oh my God, that sounds riveting and fascinating to another degree.
Uh, yeah, well, I just said it aloud once when I was actually thinking of, I went on a hike once in the forests of Chikmagalur, far away from everywhere. It felt so beautiful in the middle of the forest. And there are known to be tigers there. But fortunately, I didn't see one, and I'm glad about it. But I went swimming in a river there, and I was just thinking about the whole thing, and I said it aloud that I was skinny dipping in tiger country to my boyfriend, and he seemed to think it's delightful, and he said, "Why don't you use that as a poem?" And I wrote a poem about it, and then I thought maybe I should just title the entire collection after it because it is intriguing, as you say, and it's also fun. I'm also working on a collection of short stories. Yeah, so those are going to be.
I would like to hear more about that.
It's just still happening. I've only written about 4 stories. I plan to write about 10 before I fix the collection. So that's next to come.
We are very glad, and it would be such a treat to read, I'm sure. Is there any advice you'd like to give our new budding authors and poets?
Well, I don't know. I'm not that senior to go around giving advice to people. But I don't know. Maybe
I
if
mean, it's not about seniority.
I would say keep reading, keep writing. The only thing that makes one a writer is to read a lot, read voraciously, and just read obsessively. I mean, there is no alternative to that. You can't go to writing school or get trained. I mean, I suppose that kind of helps with icing the cake a little bit and help you hone your skills and things like that. But nothing can replace reading. So if you want to be a writer, just be a good reader at first. Learn to love what you're reading and learn to engage with it in a good way. And then let the writing come out organically. Don't force it in any way. It comes on its own. And just keep writing, and that's the only way to do it.
Basically, bibliophiles are making introverts out of the whole generation now.
That's good, because I think it really works out well because you just want to be the fly on the wall sometimes. You don't want to, when you're with a bunch of people, you don't want to talk, but that makes you a good listener. You're observing and you're, noting those characters, those quirks and things like that. And they come in handy. Being an introvert is good. It makes you a sensitive person. And being sensitive is important to writing. Because that's the only way to be honest and sincere, with your characterizations and things like that. It gives you so much depth and detail to what you're doing, and that's important. So, no harm. I really would like to tell people that being an introvert is a good thing. Don't force yourself to be anything else.
This advice is coming from 2 very heavily introverts, so
Yes.
take that as you will.
Yes.
We, we have now come at the end of today's session. It has been lovely talking to you, Maithreyi, and it was such a riveting conversation. Nerds, you know what to do out there. Check out this amazing, amazing book. It's so worth it. It's so complex and it has so many stories and relationships all inculcated in such rich history that you're just not gonna be able to stop binge reading it.
Thank you,
For
Vidushi.
more book related,
Lovely for me as well. It just felt like a nice little chat, not formal at all. Thanks for having me.
that's again introvert qualities. We love to communicate when we think we're very alone. Okay. For more book related content, you can follow Book Nerds on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Till then, thank you all for watching and see you all next time.
Thank you. Bye.